Welcome to the Whitetail Watch produced by Hoyt's Bowhunting Whitetails. Today is Wednesday, November 15th, and we're going to be talking about what we've been seeing, what the deer are doing now, and then what we can expect going into the weekend of the 18th and the 19th. So let's talk first about what we've been seeing. We did have a good week of hunting. I think throughout the central U.S., which my timing is always going to be better for people who are hunting in the Midwest, even the East, Northeast, Western U.S. and up into Canada. Some of this timing won't really apply that well for the South. Let's just say this past week has been good throughout our part of the country. Not off the charts good. I've seen years when, the rut was just smoking really good through this time frame, but we just had some good days. We had a few good days and some pretty dead ones. Everybody thinks that the deer were locked down, or the bucks, and it's just not the case because the timing of the breeding cycle of the rut does not line up with this past week. The tail end of the past week, yes, and then the next few days coming forward, those are also going to be in what I would call the peak breeding phase. Not necessarily the peak activity. I feel like the first part of this previous week was more of the peak activity phase. So I don't really know for sure why it wasn't any better than it was, across the boards. There weren't as many big deer killed as some years, and I attribute that on some level to the fact that maybe the weather was so stable that there wasn't any motivation, for the deer to make changes in their behavior. Sometimes I think they react to the changes or the fronts that come through, rather than specific weather patterns that are prolonged. But that's just my theory. I don't know if that's true or not. But for whatever reason, it just wasn't awesome when some years, given these same weather conditions, it would have been better. I shot a nice buck on the 9th, and I had a few, not much, as far as activity before that. Ethan, he had a really good encounter on the 10th. The interns are done hunting. Cody Butler, I haven't heard from him to hear what he's been seeing, but people that we've talked to, overall, there wasn't a lot of, really good mature buck activity this past week. So where does that leave us? Those who still have bow tags and are still bow hunting, we're now in the middle of what I would call the lull in the rut. Now is when the most does are in estrus. They say, biologists, that the bell-shaped curve peaks around November 15th. That's the highest number of does in estrus. Prior to that, it's a buildup, the peak around the 15th, and then it drops back off again. So the number of does in estrus is highest today than at any other point throughout the whole season. That can be okay if you've got a hot doe near your tree stand, but if not, it can be really slow because now the bucks, it's really easy for the bucks to find the next hot doe. It's way better when they're searching. That's why I always talk about the phase leading up to the peak of breeding is always better than that, 5-day window when the maximum number of does are in estrus. I think that you still hunt this. It's warm right now. Mornings are still going to be okay. I'm getting ahead of myself. I want to talk about that later in this episode. I want to continue talking about what we've been seeing. Trail camera photos have really dropped off on scrapes. The bucks just aren't scraping for the most part, and that's normal. Typically, you see the scraping activity go up until the does really start to come into estrus, and then the bucks just quit all of their normal patterns. And all they're doing at that point forward is just finding does. And I saw that the other morning. I was out for a little walk with the dogs, and there was a really big chase. Two bucks fighting over one doe. That was yesterday morning. And I saw where they went, and I got all excited about it, and I went up in there that afternoon, yesterday afternoon, thinking that, that's where they were going to be, that they were going to be holed up on that ridge. But they must have gone right on through. But my point is, that's what they're doing now. The bucks are on the does. And if you've got a hot doe near your tree stand, it's all good. Okay, so before we start breaking this down and even talking further about the states where the gun seasons are coming in, and how to prepare for that, how to, hunt these warm weather conditions, what the weather patterns are going to look like this weekend. Let's hear from our sponsors, and then I'll come back and jump into that stuff. Hoyt's Bowhunting Whitetails is brought to you by Redneck Blinds, Code of Silence Apparel, Hunt Stand Pro Whitetail, Fuse Accessories, Elevate Tree Stands, B3 Releases and Broadheads, and Hoyt. Okay, so now let's talk about how to hunt the lull. Everybody talks about it, but there's really no good way to do it, unfortunately. I've been trying to do it for 35 years. For many years I hunted every single day of the rut, thinking that somehow I was going to come up with magic. But the only thing that ever really worked during that phase for me was to be right where a hot doe was bringing the bucks by. So you just have to put your time in, hope for the best, sit in the doe bedding areas, and don't venture out into the open very much unless you see a buck and a doe go out into those areas to get away from the competition. You'll see that once in a while. You'll see the doe and the buck will move away from the traditional whitetail cover out into the more open areas, ditches, fence lines, little sinkholes, spots where they're not going to get pestered by every other buck that passes by. If you see that, then you got an opportunity to sneak in, because that buck's not going anywhere until that doe moves. He'll stand there. It's the craziest thing. I mean, he'll stand there and watch you. But if that doe sees you and runs, then he's going, of course. So it's a good opportunity to make a stalk. That can work. The other thing, like I said, is just staying close to the doe bedding areas and hoping that you have a hot doe come through. The thicker the cover, the better. The does now aren't coming out in the open, because if they come out in the open, they get pestered by every buck. So they're going in deep and they're staying, bedded or, in that thick cover. So that's where you need to be. And then we talk about this warmer weather that's on us now. The mornings are still okay. Mornings, are still pretty good, pretty chilly. It's just as the day goes on, it gets warmer and warmer, and then towards the evening, it's probably, pushing the temperature range when the bucks aren't that comfortable moving. But again, they're not moving that much anyway, so there's not a whole lot of good to come out of this time frame, unfortunately. Like I said, I've hunted it and tried to hunt it for 35 straight years, and I've really struggled. That's why I'm doing this right now on a morning rather than sitting in a tree. I've just learned the hard way that if you have things that you need to do, this lull is the best time to do them. Don't give up great hunting days if you can give up the slower ones. So let's talk a little bit now about the coming gun seasons. A lot of states are opening either now or in the very near future. I'm not a great, probably expert on how to hunt the firearm seasons, because I'm such a bow hunter at heart. I rarely hunt them. But I do know the deer, and I do know what people do that are successful. So I can give you some advice, and hopefully it's a starting point. The best spots to hunt are, again, near thick cover. I like, if I'm going to be sitting up there with a gun, I want to have a range of fire. I want to be able to cover some ground. But I want to be near thick cover, because that's where the deer are going to go if they get pushed. So you're not dealing with natural movement anymore, you're dealing with more pressured movement. So you're trying to figure out, where do the deer go if they get bumped? And that's where you need to be, but also ideally with a spot where you can cover, a range of fire. I would not get out of my tree stand. That everybody talks about the second shift movement, and it's very much a reality. People sit for a few hours and then they get bored, they get impatient. Maybe they even shot a deer and they're going over to gut it. They're gathering with their party. They're getting ready to do whatever is next, toward the middle of the day. Well, that pushes the deer back up onto their feet again. So that's the second wave, the second shift. So you want to be there for that. I mean, it can die down to nothing in the afternoon, but you should get on opening day, and anytime there's a lot of hunters in the field, you should get some pretty good action for the whole first half of the day, because people are out there milling around and moving them. So that would be my advice. And then as you get past the hard pressured times, you can start to focus more on the natural movement patterns again. And that's really what I focus on as a bow hunter, is natural movement. So most of what I talk about will apply, once the hunting pressure starts to slack off. But that's not going to be for a little while. This lull pattern is going to hold through probably the early part of the weekend, through the weekend. If you're a bow hunter and you're in an area where there's not a lot of firearms pressure, it's still going to be tough. But then we're going to come out of it next week. So by this time next week, we should be back out of this lull, and the bucks should be moving again, because again, we talk about that bell curve. The 15th maximum number of does in estrus, then it drops off. Well, the mature bucks, they haven't given up on the rut yet. They're still does in estrus because it doesn't fall off a cliff. It tails off. So let's say 3 or 4 days after the peak of breeding, there aren't very many does left in estrus, but there are some. So those mature bucks know that, and they're going to continue to look. So a lot of the really good bow hunting takes place after the peak of the rut. The bucks are worn down and they're going through business. It's not like this fever activity like you see on the front end of the breeding cycle. It's more of a let's take care of business on the back end. But they're still moving. Morning stands near doe bedding areas, even some hunting around the funnels can still be really good on the back end. So I think that, I love the time frame from about the 20th or the 22nd through the 28th, 26th to the 28th. Somewhere in that time frame can be really good again. And that brings in the Thanksgiving holiday, and we'll have time to talk about that again next Wednesday. So, all hope is not lost in those areas where you still have, the availability to hunt those days. I'm gonna be going after it hard again, once this peak of breeding tails out. I'm definitely, I got another tag. Ethan is still going to be hunting really hard. We're really trying to focus on getting our schedules cleared, so that when we get to that 20th, 22nd through the 26th, 28th time frame, that we have plenty of time to hunt. So that's where we're at. I think that I like this time. I'll be honest with you. I've killed some really nice bucks over the years hunting this tail end of the rut. I don't know that it's as good as the front end, probably not, but it's definitely better than the late season. So I'm going to try to make hay while I can. Well, I appreciate you joining me here. I'll see you right back again next week for the next episode of the Whitetail Watch, produced by Hoyt's Bowhunting Whitetails. And remember to always dream big.